Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new webinar, part of a new series that started at the end of August and will wrap up at the end of the year in December. Today, we're going to talk a bit about oral presentations, the challenges they can present in the classroom nowadays, and how we can address them by getting students more involved in this type of activity. As for the webinars we're offering, there will certainly be more to come. You can currently see the ones that are already scheduled with set dates, but others may still be added, especially with the participation of certain teachers or members of educational teams who have created interesting activities and will come to share their experiences. But for all these new webinars, you will be informed directly by the teams because we communicate with them. So today we're really going to focus on these oral presentations. I'll quickly go over the main issues, especially the challenges we might face today with oral presentations in class with students, the benefits we can gain by using a very specific methodology that I will present, whether it's for the students presenting, those evaluating, or for the teachers. I'll also show you a few different examples of possible formats. I'll present 3 or 4 of them. Of course, there are indeed many more examples, but for now, I'll specifically show you the practical ones that you can very quickly and easily implement with Challenge Me. How will you be able to set up this type of activity? I'll also present some criteria that might be useful and a small checklist, a bit of everything you need to plan ahead to set up this type of activity and properly structure it so that it works as well as possible. Next, I'll show you a bit about how and why you can use Challenge Me for this type of assessment, highlighting the benefits of the platform for these oral presentations. And finally, I'll give you a concrete demonstration of how to create this type of activity on Challenge Me. So I'll go directly onto the platform and do a step-by-step walkthrough to show you how you can launch this type of activity, as well as how you can track participation and collect all the data and exchanges that may have taken place between students. I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Florent and I work at Challenge Me. I'm a coach and I'm responsible for supporting students and teachers on the platform. We have a solution that was originally designed for peer assessment, but we've since evolved the platform. Now it's a more comprehensive solution for assessment and feedback, really aimed at promoting learning. We're integrated with most school tools like Moodle, Blackboard, and Brightspace. This is really to ensure ease of use both for teachers and students. We're directly integrated into the courses and there's no need to provide usernames, passwords, or anything like that. To log in, everything is as simple as possible, just like a tool that's truly integrated into the school. Let's get straight to the heart of the matter, focusing on the different challenges and possibly also the issues we might encounter during oral presentations. The idea behind an oral presentation is to assess various aspects of a presentation, whether it's the content or the form. And generally, in this type of presentation, the students are spectators, while the teacher takes notes, gives feedback live, or directly evaluates the presentations using their tools. But it almost always goes only one way. It's the teacher who evaluates the group or the person presenting, and the rest of the people watching the presentation are really just spectators. And the small issue we often encounter is that presentations usually follow one after another, so there's a bit of a lack of time to give feedback. The teacher can spend a little bit of time giving feedback to each group that presented, but this feedback can be quickly forgotten because we're in the middle of presentations, we've finished, we move on to something else, and so on. The same goes for the student or the group that presented. They receive the feedback, but then they move on to something else, and so on. So it can be quickly forgotten by the students. As a direct result, since they genuinely don't get enough constructive feedback or perhaps didn't truly take it in, they're going to have significant trouble identifying precisely what might effectively work and what specific areas they really need to improve upon. On the student side, if we also ask them to give feedback quickly in class to the group that presented, they're going to have a bit of trouble judging the presenting group objectively because they might not necessarily have the evaluation criteria or things like that. It's feedback that's given a bit on the fly. So they might end up holding back. Those who are more shy also might not necessarily take part in this live evaluation to give feedback in front of the whole class. So they'll tend to have a more passive attitude and so on. So there are quite a few issues nowadays that we can see with this type of presentation. For teachers as well, there's always this somewhat time-consuming aspect. Group after group, we give feedback that is often the same and so on. So It's not always interesting or very motivating for teachers either. And as I mentioned, there's really limited student participation with this kind of live feedback. So the idea is to change things up a bit, to transform this whole activity into something much more fun and interesting, both for teachers, but especially for students. So, as I was saying, we're going to try to turn oral presentations into a truly comprehensive learning experience, not just for those doing the evaluating, meaning the teacher and the students, but also for those presenting. So the groups or students who are presenting will also benefit from all of this. So really, for those who are evaluating, actually by asking them to evaluate concretely on a platform, why not on Challenge Me? But it could be any evaluation platform. It will help them pay more attention because the evaluation will be a bit more structured. There will be clear evaluation criteria that have been defined. We even recommend that you present these criteria ahead of time, before the activity, before the presentations. That way, the students know, those who are presenting know exactly what they will be evaluated on, and those who are evaluating understand the framework of the evaluation and will actually be able to provide fairer assessments. So they will be a bit more attentive because while the group is presenting, they will have to evaluate, or perhaps we can allow a little time at the end of each presentation, 5 or 10 minutes for all the students, so that they can really evaluate directly on the platform and provide feedback to each group that has presented. So this will also help them learn how to give constructive feedback and strengthen their critical thinking skills. For that, we also have some guides to help students build this so-called constructive feedback. We also have a few, I'll talk about it a bit later, but some small features with AI that will help the student support them in how to give good feedback. We're not going to give the feedback for them. The AI assistant won't give the feedback for them, but it will really support them. It will analyze their feedback, the grades they've given, and provide suggestions for improvement to help them give feedback that's a bit more meaningful. If the student, for example, just writes great presentation, well, that's not constructive feedback. The AI will prompt them to elaborate a bit more on all of that. So there you have it. It's really going to help the student formulate constructive feedback for the group they're evaluating. I also mentioned this a little earlier. The more timid students will be able to participate, and we often realize that people who have a bit of trouble speaking in front of the whole class to give feedback still have very interesting things to say. And so the fact of doing it directly on the platform, and moreover anonymously, because you can also manage a form of anonymity on the platform, means that when the group receives and reads all the feedback it has gotten, this feedback will be presented anonymously. So this will allow everyone to really express themselves and share how they feel. And there are often very interesting things that come out of the class feedback. Obviously, really involving them in this evaluation process also has positive side effects. They will better understand the expectations. And so when it's their turn to present, they'll really know what to do and what is expected of them. So for the students who are going to present, once they've given their presentation, they'll also be able to go on the platform and see all the feedback they've received from their classmates. So here, instead of just getting feedback or a grade from the teacher, they'll have, I don't know, 20 or 30 pieces of feedback to analyze. So that can be really interesting for them. Here as well, we have a little AI assistant module that will synthesize all the evaluations they've received to really present them with their strengths and the areas for improvement identified in their presentation. So it could be interesting to implement this. As I was saying, it will really help them identify areas for growth. It will centralize feedback from all the students because it won't just be things that were said off the cuff during or right after the presentation. It will really be on the platform. They'll be able to come back and consult it a bit later. Let's imagine it's a mock oral presentation. Well, in that case, we'll be able to go back, see everything that didn't go well, and do something of higher quality by relying on all the feedback we've received. And another effect is that we'll learn how to receive feedback. It's important nowadays for students to know how to give feedback, but also to know how to receive feedback. So really take the interesting things, the relevant points, don't get defensive if a negative point has been raised, and instead try to improve and so on. So there you have it. All of these are interesting elements for the students, both those who will be evaluating and those who will be presenting. And for teachers, the teacher on the platform will be able to have a somewhat global view of performance with all the grades for each student, the grades, whether it's the data, but also the grades received by group or by student if the evaluations are not done individually. This will also allow them to save time directly because they will write their evaluations on the platform. And it will also make it possible to identify differences in perception among the students themselves. What did they think of the groups they evaluated? Are there really common points that come up, or are there differences of opinion? So it can be interesting to see what each student thought about the different presentations, but also to very quickly and concretely see on the platform what the students thought compared to what the teacher thought of the evaluation, to see if there is a consensus on the best evaluations or on the points that could be improved in certain presentations. So there you have it. All of this will be available on the platform. So really we have an overall view. It can be super interesting to analyze and so on. That's something you can't do if you just do it on the fly by giving only feedback or just a grade from the teacher. I'm going to present to you the different possible formats that can be set up. As I said, they're not exhaustive, but I've chosen 4 of them directly. So the first one, the classic format, is really going to have 2 distinct phases. A phase of evaluating the presentations that will be given by the students, and then in a second step, a second phase where the results are displayed, during which students will be able, at the end of the week, at the end of the class, or at the end of the day, to check their results, as I mentioned, with a summary of all their evaluations. So that's the classic format. It's the foundation that we can adapt into other formats. But the benefits of this format will also apply to all the other formats because it's the basic format. So it helps increase attention, encourages continuous improvement of presentations, and so on. We can add to this type of format simply as a second format to encourage or spark discussions in class. A debrief, so a session, whether it's right after the presentation or presentations, a debrief with the students so they can express themselves. So here we're combining a bit of both, oral expression with the aspect of giving real-time feedback, plus I've also given and, so to speak, archived it on the platform. That way, everything I say is also saved on the platform, and the students who received feedback on their presentations can come back later after having received the feedback, return to the platform, and review everything that was said to remember it and work on it. So that's something that is regularly set up, this kind of debriefing space once the results have been published so that students can interact and exchange ideas. We also have, as I mentioned earlier, peer assessment. So here the idea is to always involve the students so that they evaluate the presentations, but at the same time to involve the teacher as well. So this can take several forms, let's say. This format can be broken down into several smaller formats, meaning that we can imagine students and the teacher evaluating with 2 completely different sets of criteria, a more standard one for the students and perhaps a slightly more advanced set of criteria for the teacher. We can also use exactly the same set of criteria if we want to. And at the end, we can generate a combined grade from these 2 evaluations. So for example, we could say that the teacher's grade counts for 70% and the student's grade counts for 30% and so on. That way, their evaluation really matters. They really feel like they're not just giving feedback, but actually contributing to the evaluation like a teacher, and their assessment counts toward the final grade. So it's also interesting to present this format to them to get them involved in the evaluations. And the last format I'm going to present, which is a bit special, is a slightly more asynchronous format. Sometimes we can't do the evaluation in class, so we ask students to make videos in which they introduce themselves directly, where they do their presentation on video. And here we can absolutely use this format on the platform as well. You simply need, when creating these evaluation phases, to add a submission phase before the evaluations. So a phase for submitting the videos. And then the students will make their evaluation videos, their presentation videos, excuse me. And then in a second step, all the students will evaluate all the presentation videos that have been made based on well-defined criteria, and then they can check their results. So that works too. You can ask them to do this in a somewhat asynchronous way. And generally, with this type of format, the deadlines for evaluations are a bit more flexible. They are not alone. They might not have just 1 hour to evaluate, but instead we will give them several days to assess all the videos at their own pace. Quickly, regarding this aspect of submitting work before evaluating it, I'm mentioning it. I didn't present it earlier, but I'm adding it now. During a presentation evaluation, you can also absolutely ask the group to submit their presentation materials. So generally, these are PowerPoint presentations, PDFs, etc. You can absolutely ask the group to submit their work beforehand. That way, the student who comes onto the platform to evaluate the presentation they are watching live also has direct access to the presentation file on their interface in case they want to see the details of the file and so on. And see all the elements that have been included in the document the group is presenting. So that's another format that can also be implemented. I'll also show you some criteria, including the famous checklist, to properly set up this type of activity. Really, we'll divide the criteria into two categories. There will be criteria that really focus on form and others on content. So, for example, regarding form, it could be mastery of voice and rhythm and engagement with the audience. For the evaluation criteria you can include, you'll be able to integrate several or rather different evaluation methods. I'm presenting one here, which is simply a value to select. So here we've defined 4 levels for each criterion, and the student will simply click on the desired value for the criterion to evaluate it. So this is really in the spirit of wanting to structure the evaluation with clearly defined criteria with well-defined levels for each criterion. And the student, let's say we leave much less room for subjectivity. Each time they will define the value associated with each criterion. We can have something a little more open, let's say, with other evaluation systems like stars or simply giving grades. So here, let's imagine we give or we leave this criterion of mastery of voice and rhythm, and the student can absolutely give a score from 0 to 5 or from 0 to 10. But in that case, it will really be based on their own feeling. Whether they give a 6 or a 7, they might not really know why. With this type of criteria and evaluation methods, we really structure the evaluation and the student will choose one of these values. So that's for the criteria related to form. I'll also show you a few related to content, which are more about, for example, the clarity and relevance of the message or the quality of the analysis or argumentation. All these criteria can be found as predefined criteria in our activities, in the activities on Challenge Me. There is already a set of criteria available. You can absolutely pick from them. We have nearly 100 criteria available for different types of assessment, but you can also absolutely create your own criteria if you wish. If you already have your own set of criteria, you can easily integrate it into your challenges, into your activities. A little checklist that we usually give when someone, a teacher, is creating activities on Challenge Me for the first time, just to provide some guidance. We let them know that it's important to properly plan the periods during which students will be evaluating. It's entirely possible during in-class presentations to have evaluations take place on Monday, because on Monday it's group 1, group 2, and group 3 who will present evaluations on Tuesday. So that would be group 4, 5, 6, and so on. As a result, we can plan several evaluation periods like this, which will follow one after another according to the dates you set, allowing each group to present and avoiding having something that's open continuously over an entire week. We will really set specific dates. For example, the first evaluations will be on Monday morning from 10 to noon, on Tuesday morning from 10 to noon, the second evaluations, and so on. And that way you clearly structure your evaluation periods, defining the criteria, of course. So this is almost the most important thing in peer evaluation. It's really about defining the criteria, explaining them to the teachers, and so on, so that the evaluations are as fair as possible. Still with this idea of providing clear structure, present the format to the students, explain the objectives, why they will have to evaluate, how it will benefit them, and so on. The benefits, in fact, of this type of evaluation, and more generally of peer evaluation or co-evaluation. Training students to give feedback. As I mentioned earlier, we have quite a few documents, especially directly when they are evaluating, and we provide default instructions for each of our activities. And in these default instructions, there is always a guide on how to give and receive feedback, how to phrase it, what is expected from good feedback, and so on. So it's useful to share this guide with them, or at least let them know that the guide is included in the instructions and that it's always worthwhile to consult it before carrying out evaluations, because it will teach them how to give good feedback and how to formulate meaningful responses. Always properly supervise the evaluation process to ensure it is taken seriously. We make sure they have understood, that they grasp the stakes involved, and so on. You should also let them know that the results are provided anonymously, so they can express themselves freely, but at the same time you do have the names of the people who are evaluating, so things don't get out of hand. Make sure to properly frame all of this and explain to them the ins and outs of this type of evaluation and this activity. And as I mentioned earlier, really try to anticipate a feedback phase where at the end you can have a bit of a discussion with your students about what they simply thought of this type of evaluation. But also, did it bring them anything? Were the feedbacks constructive and so on? Did they manage to improve thanks to the feedback given by their peers and so on? So it can also be interesting to anticipate a short feedback phase like this at the very end of the evaluations and the course. I'm going to explain a bit about the value of challenge.me in this context and why I encourage you to use challenge.me for this type of evaluation. Now, these are things I've already mentioned in part. So we have quite a few challenge templates, and we have one template that's really useful for this type of evaluation, a classroom presentation evaluation template. We have a whole database of criteria, which I mentioned earlier. All the data can be exported in Excel format if you want to rework it, archive it, and so on. You also have support available to help you create your challenge, monitor your challenge, and even analyze your challenge. Support is also there to help students if they have trouble logging in, if they're not in the right group, and so on. They can absolutely contact support, which is quite responsive. We have guides as well, as I mentioned, and automatic reminders. For example, if they need to evaluate or submit an assignment by a specific date, there are automatic reminders that can be sent to those who haven't yet submitted their work if they're required to upload their presentation materials in advance. Or for those who haven't completed their evaluations, we'll send them a last-minute reminder to make sure they've done their evaluations. So this takes some of the workload off the teacher. There are also calculations and weightings for the grades, as I mentioned earlier. If we use co-evaluation, we can imagine that the teacher's evaluation carries more weight than the student's evaluations. We have AI assistants, which I also mentioned, and quite a few resources for each of our challenges. But in addition, we also have other resources on our online guide, which you can consult and share with your students. So that's a bit of the significant value and the core essence of Challenge Me in this particular context. And now I will move on to show you directly on the platform exactly how to effectively set up this specific type of engaging activity. So I'm going to share my screen and switch interfaces. Share. I'm going to put this here to make it more interesting. So here I'm on Moodle. I'm going to start from a Moodle where I'll log in directly as a teacher. I'll go into my course and add an activity to show you how it works. So I'm logging in. I'm going to my courses to take a look. I'm going to go into my demo course here. And I'm simply going to switch to editing mode to add a Challenge Me activity to my course. So here, let's imagine I have all the elements of my course with the different sections, etc. I add my Challenge Me activity here, which is available. I'm going to give my activity a name. Okay, here I'll just put peer evaluation, but you can name it whatever you like. You just need to fill in the name. I'm going to go back to the course. There we go, my peer evaluation activity. So Challenge Me has been successfully added. I can turn off editing mode if I want to. And I'm going to click on it to start configuring my challenge a bit. And so here I'll be able to access different elements. If I've already created challenges and I want to reuse them, I can simply click here to duplicate an existing challenge, and I'll be able to retrieve the entire configuration from a previous challenge. This saves me from having to reconfigure everything I've already set up each time. In my case, I'm going to look at the available templates, especially the popular ones. Among the popular templates, there's one that matches exactly what I want, evaluating classroom presentations. It's clearly specified that there's no need to submit work or presentations because there's another template that allows students to submit their work in advance. I'm going to choose the simplest template, which is simply an in-class presentation evaluation. And students don't need to submit their work in advance on the platform. I'm going to click on Create here, and now I arrive at the challenge configuration. So it's going to guide me step by step. Here we can see the different steps, general information where I can enter the title of my challenge, a brief summary, scheduling where I can set the presentation dates and evaluation dates. So setting dates is very simple. I click on the phase, I set the start date for presentations, the start of evaluation, end of evaluation. I can enable notifications or not. I can set the date when the results will be available to students. Here the results will be calculated. If I have several evaluation phases, I can easily add other phases here to set additional dates, etc. As I was saying, if these presentations need to be done tomorrow between 9 a.m. and Thursday, I might also have some next week. So I would add new evaluation phases. So here we have a phase dedicated to that, evaluation of the in-class presentation assignment. I just have to add it, set the dates, etc. To create it. Here I will find my different phases here. Next, I'll move on to the instructions, where I'll enter the evaluation guidelines for each of my phases. So as I was saying, there are always default instructions. You can leave them as they are. It's pretty straightforward. Students are asked to evaluate the presentations based on the different criteria that will be presented to them. And the well-known guide here, which is always available, there's a link to access a guide on how to give relevant feedback. Similarly, in the results phase, by default, we simply thank them for their participation, but there's also a short guide on how to interpret and receive feedback. We always try to support students as much as possible with this type of evaluation and teach them how to give and receive feedback. Once you have entered your instructions for each of the different phases, you can click on the participants to add them to the group they will have to present to. So it really happens in 2 steps. First, we add the participants to the group to be evaluated, either individually or as a group here. I click and I could have the list of my groups appear here directly. For now in my course, as I mentioned, this is a test Moodle course. I don't have any groups, but if I did, they would show up here directly. I could select, for example, group 1, group 2, group 3, who will present in my presentation evaluation phase. I can usually enroll them individually, but it can also be done as a team. That means if I enroll the students individually, they will each have to evaluate every group. If I enroll them as a team, then they will have to discuss among themselves as a group to provide a joint group evaluation directly. That's another way to do it, but it's absolutely possible. You can choose to enroll your students individually or as a team. Next, we have the evaluation criteria. By default, in this template, there are 6 criteria presented. Earlier, I showed them to you with predefined options with clearly defined values. Here, it's the well-known star rating system that's presented by default. Presentation skills, the ability to detach from one's notes, knowledge, etc. We also provide a small guide to help the student with the evaluation. They will then be able to evaluate by selecting the desired number of stars. But you can also add new criteria or remove the default ones to include your own criteria. So you can add new criteria from scratch here simply by defining the name of your criterion. As for the evaluation method, as I mentioned, you have stars, numbers, predefined options, checkboxes, or just a text field. A text field isn't for evaluation. It's simply an open-ended question where students are asked to provide feedback. So that's really for creating your own criterion, but you can also simply click on the predefined criteria. And as I mentioned, here we have a large number of available criteria, each with different evaluation methods. You can browse through them like this, and if there's a criterion that interests you, you check it. If there are several, you check them all and select them. This automatically adds them to your challenge. And here, for example, we find a criterion that doesn't correspond at all to classroom presentations, but in the idea of doing so, this is so you can see this type of criteria with different predefined options. And the student will simply select the option they want when they want to evaluate that criterion. You can choose to enable or disable global feedback. By default, it is enabled and you can make it mandatory. I didn't mention it, but for each criterion, you can also enable feedback if you wish. So the idea here is that for each feedback, students will be able to leave an additional comment, as well as global feedback if it is enabled. So this is really to provide very specific feedback on each criterion. Usually, if we enable feedback, we don't include too many criteria. If you have 10 criteria, adding feedback for each one plus the global feedback is a lot. So you need to find the best option for that. You have to decide, should I include a lot of criteria for them to assess and then just have global feedback, or maybe have fewer criteria but allow for more comments on each one by enabling feedback for each criterion? So as you can see, you can really build your rubric however you want right here by using our predefined criteria or by creating your own. Next, we have different options here. By default, this option is checked here to display the names of the authors of the work to be evaluated. So actually, this is to explain that when students come to evaluate, when they log into the platform, on the platform, they will see the names of the groups, because by default it can be anonymous, but that's generally when you're evaluating a piece of work. When evaluating a piece of work on the platform, the name or group that submitted the work is not displayed, so that we evaluate the work itself and not a specific group or individual. In the case of evaluating presentations in class, obviously this doesn't apply because you can see the person you're evaluating. So it's perfectly fine to display the names of these people on the platform. You also have different options in the results phase. You will be able to manage the visibility of results for each participant, hide certain elements, hide everything, allow them to see their grades or only their feedback, and so on. So you have various details, different levels of granularity regarding what you want to display to your students. The well-known coefficients, if you want the grade to be out of 10, out of 20, you can set this parameter. The different coefficients, as I mentioned earlier, you can specify that the teacher's evaluation of the presentations has a greater weight than the student's evaluation, and so on. So you will be able to manage coefficients. You can even go further in detail with the coefficients by assigning specific coefficients to each criterion. By default, they all have the same weight, but you can specify that this particular criterion counts a bit more in the grade calculation. So you will apply coefficients and the system will calculate the final grade using all these elements you have defined. You can also apply late penalties for those who submit their evaluations late if you allow late evaluations. And possibly also penalties for those who did not participate in the evaluation. So imagine a particular group that is giving its important presentation. Later, they will also act as the evaluators. And if I haven't evaluated their work, I will certainly lose points on the presentation I gave. So it's really quite a significant situation. Something to take into account if you want penalties to be applied, but you generally need to communicate them to your students. Next, we can define the number of presentations each student will have to evaluate. Let's imagine that for the presentation evaluations, I have 10 groups presenting. I'll put 10 because I want them to evaluate all the presentations. If I only want them to evaluate 2, I can specify 2 and define which presentations they will have to evaluate, etc. You can really leave this on automatic by saying you want them to evaluate everything, or you can be more specific by saying, I want this person to evaluate this particular group and that group. I want this person or this group to evaluate these specific groups. You can absolutely set all of that here in the presentation evaluation. The little AI assistance module I mentioned to you, quickly you can add agents at each stage. As I mentioned, you can add agents who will help. The student has written good feedback, and these agents will help them synthesize all the feedback they've received. So we have agents directly within our system. Ready to use, let's say, for this type of work, you just have to add an agent to your phase here. Select from the several agents we have, choose the one that matches what you want to do, and simply confirm. Once you have filled in all these steps, you can publish your challenge, and the evaluations will start on the date you specified here in the scheduling table. So there you have it. It's quite simple. We move fairly quickly through each of these steps. It's pretty straightforward so that you can create this challenge. And finally, I've gone a bit over time, but it will really just take 2 minutes. To finish, I'll quickly show you a challenge that has already started and what information the teacher can view for this type of assessment. I'm going to go into a course here in our demo course, and I have a challenge that's specifically for evaluating presentations, which is already set up. So I'll click on it. And now as a teacher, I find myself with something that has already started. We can see that 6 out of 17 students have completed their evaluations. I can click on it to see recent activities. So Alex Lefebvre evaluated Group B and gave them this grade. He also evaluated Group A and gave them this grade. I have the list of all my students. They had 2 evaluations to complete, apparently. Did they do it? Did they not do it? And so on. This little element here possibly indicates potential overgrading. If the arrow points down, it suggests possible undergrading. So you can click on it to see the details of the evaluations, the grade given, and so on. You really have detailed, precise information about everything your students have done. That's for the evaluation participation phase. And you also have the results phase. And there you'll be able to see the details of the grades for each group. So Group C, A, B, with the highest grade for Group C here, and here the grades for each student, including the number of evaluations they've received, the average, the standard deviations between the minimum grade, the maximum grade, and the median grade here, which is displayed. So here you have all these elements, and if you also evaluated, you can go here in this section to see the overall grades. And if you participated in the evaluation, you will have an extra column here showing the students' selection of presentations. But if you also took part in the evaluation by doing a peer review, your grade will be displayed in this column here. And you will be able to quickly see your grade, the grade given by the students, and the overall grade, which may have been calculated with any weightings you may have set. So you really have an overview of all the elements of the entire evaluation that has been carried out, and you can easily export all these elements in Excel format, but you can also directly transfer these grades into the course gradebook here by clicking on Publish Grades to LMS. So publish the grades to your course's gradebook with a single click if you want these grades to be reflected in your course's gradebook. But there you go. I've covered everything. I hope everything was clear for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact coach.challengeme.online. If you need to go further with this presentation, feel free to request a meeting and we'll be happy to go over everything together. All that's left for me is to wish you a good lunch, a great day, and a wonderful week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.